The art gallery, a cathedral of glass and mirrors, held its breath when Isabella, the artist whom the elite had disdained for her poverty and her tasteless canvases, revealed, in a burst of color and truth, that the monumental central sculpture, her masterpiece that had silenced her detractors, concealed within every fiber the name and memory of a man whom everyone believed to be a myth, her eternal guardian angel, who had not only paid every one of her impossible debts, but who, in the shadows, had orchestrated her ascent, weaving the sweetest vindication and a justice that transcended life and death. Hello, my dear friend. Prepare yourself, because today we are going to dive into a story that will chill you to the bone, that will show you the beauty of dignity amidst misery, and how sometimes justice arrives at the hand of an invisible protector, a whisper in the dark that becomes a deafening cry, unmasking the rawest truths. Isabella Rossi, 28 years old and with a soul tattooed with invisible scars, lived in a small studio that smelled of turpentine and broken dreams, a forgotten corner in an old building whose paint peeled like her own hope. Her hands, which for her were an extension of her heart and which once molded clay with the delicacy of a caress and wielded brushes with the audacity of a whirlwind, were now rough and cracked from the strong soap she used to clean the bathrooms of a cheap coffee shop, and from the constant friction with the humblest materials she could afford for her canvases. She wore the same clothes as always, a pair of jeans frayed at the knees and a faded cotton t-shirt that was once white, now adorned with paint stains and the dust of countless days, her uniform for the daily battle. Her old sneakers, with holes strategically covered with adhesive tape, offered no protection against the constant cold that seeped through the broken window of the studio, forcing her to shrink, to make herself small to survive the winter that froze her bones. The light, a scarce commodity in that cubicle, barely dared to peek through the light well, leaving her home in perpetual gloom, a somber reflection of her own existence, of the life that was denied to her at every turn. Every morning, as she tried to stretch her aching body on the thin mattress on the floor, a barely audible groan escaped her dry lips, an expression of the dull pain in her back and the numbness of her joints, painful relics of endless nights dedicated to work and art. And in her mind, the eternal question, is it really worth it? So much pain, so much sacrifice for a passion that consumes me and gives me nothing in return? Contempt was her shadow. She saw it in the fleeting glances of passers-by who hurried to cross the street at the sight of her stained clothes, in the frowns of the immaculate gallery owners who covered their noses as they passed her stall at the flea market, where she tried to sell her small watercolors for a few cents. Once, a woman in high heels and a branded leather handbag, Madame Dubois, the city's most influential and feared art critic, stopped in front of one of her paintings. Her eyes, once filled with fleeting curiosity, scrutinized her with a mix of condescending pity and open disgust, as if Isabella and her art were a stain on the impeccable canvas of her perfect life. Madame Dubois raised a gloved hand to point to a stroke on the canvas. "My dear, is this what you call art? It's rudimentary, without technique, too emotional, too raw. Art must elevate, not drag itself in the mud of despair. It's a shame. You have no potential, young lady. You don't." The phrase, seemingly simple, pierced Isabella's chest with the force of 1,000 icy daggers. She felt a blush of shame rise up her neck, setting her face on fire. Her hands, which she tried to keep steady in her lap, trembled slightly, betraying the fragility of her composure. A tight knot closed her throat, preventing her from responding, and tears, those treacherous drops that threatened to overflow, accumulated behind her eyelids, stinging her eyes with painful intensity. She bit the inside of her cheek, concentrating on the small physical pain so as not to succumb to the humiliation, so as not to allow that woman's distorted view of her to define her. They just want to see me fall, she thought, clenching her fists with silent force, the tremor of her body barely perceptible. They want me to give up, to accept my place in this mud they themselves created. But I won't give them that satisfaction. No. Not me. My art is not rudimentary, it is real. And reality, Madame Dubois, is much more powerful than your hypocritical sophistication. The echo of those words, "no potential," resonated with a particular bitterness, because that phrase, deep down, was the constant of her life, the same one that had dragged her into solitude and oblivion after the death of her parents. Two bohemian artists who, in the end, had only left her debts and a legacy of broken dreams. But Isabella was not just a silhouette of debts and humiliations, a marginal artist who cleaned bathrooms. Beneath that facade of vulnerability, beneath the ragged clothes and perpetual tiredness, lay a mind of exceptional brilliance and unprecedented emotional depth. Her hidden treasure was an almost mystical ability to grasp the essence of people and places, an intuition so sharp that it bordered on precognition. She could read the hidden emotions in gestures, in the inflection of a voice, in the nuance of a glance, and transform them into vibrant colors, into abstract forms that told stories without words. In addition, she possessed a prodigious photographic memory for details that others overlooked. The tilt of a sunbeam on a window, the pattern of cracks in a wall, the particular gleam in someone's eyes when lying. Her father, a talented sculptor who died in poverty, had taught her from childhood not only the technique of art, but also the philosophy of observation, the importance of light and shadow, the truth hidden in the smallest details. She remembered every conversation with him, every lesson on composition, on the psychology of color, on the impermanence of appearances and the essential truth of things. It was that ability to see beyond, to understand underlying truths, that made her a unique artist. And what would make her survive in a world that insisted on destroying her? They are vultures, Alejandro. Vultures in expensive suits and porcelain smiles, Isabella thought. As she scrubbed floors in the noisy coffee shop kitchen, the hot steam fogging her glasses over and over again, creating a haze that barely allowed her to see clearly. The smell of stale grease and cheap detergent turned her stomach, a constant nausea that had become part of her life. But her mind did not rest. There was no truce for her thoughts. They revel in the misery of others, build their empires on the rubble of other people's lives, on the innocence and hard work of people like my parents. How is it possible that they can sleep at night? That luxury does not drown them, knowing the irreparable harm they have caused, the lives they have destroyed without the slightest remorse. She bit her lower lip so hard that she sometimes tasted the metallic flavor of blood, the image of Madame Dubois' icy face, the art critic, burned into her memory, every hurtful word, every gesture of disdain, a constant reminder of her pain. They see me as a mere cleaner, a failed artist, a statistic of misery in their cold balance sheets. One more in the endless list of the fallen, the forgotten. They perceive me as a shadow, an impediment walking through the world, without ambition, without a future. But they don't know what's inside, what boils in my head, what burns in my spirit, the colors that form, the textures that are sculpted, even while my hands are submerged in this greasy, disgusting foam. They believe that money is the only power, the only currency that matters, the only one that opens doors. But they are terribly wrong. Truth intelligence forged in adversity, the resilience of the human spirit. That is what truly brings down empires, what topples giants with feet of clay. Her heart beat with a dull, constant rhythm in her chest, a drum of resistance that kept her anchored, despite the tiredness that weighed on her shoulders, the pain in her back, and the mental exhaustion. A spark of fire, an indomitable gleam, shone in her eyes, a tacit promise that she would not give up, not until her art and the memory of her parents were recognized, restored, until justice, that elusive lady, finally sat on the throne that belonged to her. Vengeance, in her case, was not for resentment, but for truth, the truth of her art, and the truth of her origins. The antagonists of this story, the true predators lurking in the brilliant and treacherous art world, were two imposing figures. Madame Odette Dubois, the city's most influential and ruthless art critic, a woman of impeccable manners and enigmatic smile, but with a pen that could destroy careers with a single stroke. And Monsieur Jean-Luc Laurent, the owner of the most prestigious and exclusive art gallery, Laurent Artium, a man of exquisite taste and an air of sophistication, but with a reputation forged in the exploitation of young artists and the falsification of works. Both formed a lethal duo, a hunting ground where talent was a commodity and integrity an unnecessary luxury. Madame Dubois had publicly disparaged Isabella's parents' art, labeling them impoverished bohemians without vision or technique, contributing to their isolation and eventual financial ruin. Monsieur Laurent, for his part, had taken advantage of their desperation, buying valuable works from her father for ridiculous prices, knowing their true value, and then reselling some as his own, or attributing them to others. One day, while Isabella was trying to sell one of her wire sculptures at a small craft market in Artists' Square, she saw Monsieur Laurent pass by with an entourage of collectors. He wore a pristine linen suit and a smug smile on his face. He casually stopped in front of Isabella's stall. "Ah, Miss Rossi," he said with a tone that was intended to be kind but reeked of deep condescension. "Still with these rustic pieces. I remember your parents. Talented, yes, but so commercial. A shame. Art, my dear, is a business, and you, clearly, don't understand business." And he let out a dry, cold laugh that echoed through the bustling market. Then he leaned in, feigning interest, and whispered loudly enough for Isabella and others to hear. "You should consider a more stable career. Something less demanding for your, shall we say, budget. Perhaps my cleaning services have an extra vacancy at the gallery." His eyes, full of a malicious gleam, met Isabella's, a gesture of open contempt, as if the young woman's mere presence was an affront to his refined world. Isabella felt a shiver run down her spine, a sharp pang of pain mixed with icy fury. Humiliation crept up her neck, setting her ears on fire. Her hands, tightly holding a small modeling tool, trembled slightly, threatening to crush the delicate wire between her fingers. She took a deep breath, trying to control the rage boiling in her veins. The betrayal in Monsieur Laurent's voice, the memory of how he had exploited her parents, was almost as palpable as the opulent air of the market. She wanted to scream. She wanted to break something. She wanted to confront him and tell him that his business was just fraud disguised as culture. But she held back. Her silence was her armor. "They laugh at me now," Isabella thought, her internal monologue a symphony of defiance. "They think I'm just a poor ignoramus, an artist with no future. But they don't know what true strength means, true vision. They live by appearances. I live by truth. And one day, Monsieur Laurent, my rustic art will be your worst nightmare. That laugh will freeze in their throats. And then they will see who the real artist is and who the real charlatan is. The rage, far from consuming her, nourished her, propelled her. A silent engine that began to ignite deep within her being, a determination that burned with silent intensity. Isabella's daily life was a symphony of deprivation and the struggle for survival, a brutal contrast to the vibrant art world to which she rightfully belonged. She rose before dawn, when the city still slept under a blanket of gray mist and the streets were empty of passers-by. The icy floor of her small studio greeted her with a pang in her bare feet, a sensation as familiar as the air she breathed. The cold shower, an icy torrent that ran over her body, was a necessary torture. A shock that helped her wake up, to ignore the constant hum of hunger in her stomach, a silent protest that accompanied her from awakening. Her breakfast was always the same, a meager offering to survival. Watery coffee that barely tasted like coffee, and a piece of stale bread that she chewed with the slowness of someone who knows that every bite is precious. Rations strictly portioned to stretch the little she earned. Then, the long walk to the coffee shop where she cleaned bathrooms, her old sneakers dragging on the pavement, dodging glances. The journey sometimes took her through the exclusive gallery district, where storefronts gleamed with unattainable works of art, accentuating the pang of her own poverty. At the coffee shop, the day was an endless cycle of metallic noises. The clinking of cups, the rattling of cutlery, the whirring of coffee machines. Harsh orders from the owner and cooks, and the constant smell of burnt coffee and cleaning products that clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin, like a persistent second skin. The owner, a young and ambitious man, who had hired her out of desperation, treated her with a condescending familiarity, often making comments about her disheveled appearance or her lack of ambition. "Isabella, are you done with the bathrooms yet? They look like a pigsty, as if you'd painted them with your brushes. Ha 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 ha," he snapped one day, his voice laden with a tone meant to be humorous but dripping with venom. "You should be glad to have a job, looking like that and with no connections. No one else would hire you, you know. So smile, girl. The customer doesn't want to see long faces." Isabella pressed her lips together so tightly that she felt a slight tremor in her jaw. Feeling the heat of shame spread up her neck and tinging her cheeks with furious red, she forced herself to smile. A forced grimace that hurt her soul. A supreme effort not to utter the words that crowded in her throat. Every word of contempt, every condescending look, every time they made her feel invisible, was like a small thorn piercing her heart, accumulating day after day, feeding a silent reserve of contained rage, of a determination that grew with every injustice, with every humiliation. Other times, she crossed paths with artists of her generation, some who had studied with her at the art academy, now with galleries, with exhibitions. One day, while buying cheap materials at a student art supply store, she ran into an old classmate, Clara, who was looking for imported pigments. Clara saw her and her eyes widened in surprise, then with barely disguised disgust. "Isabella, heavens! What are you doing here? Hadn't you retired? You look different," she said, her voice laced with a tone that meant to be casual but dripped with pity and contempt, and a slight aversion. She didn't dare to get too close, as if mere contact with poverty could contaminate her. Isabella nodded with a tense smile, her heart pounding in her chest, feeling the scrutiny of her eyes, the silent evaluation that reduced her to nothing. "Life takes many turns," she replied hoarsely, an irony that Clara wouldn't catch. "Yes, I see," Clara murmured, and quickly walked away, as if she had just encountered a ghost. Each of these interactions, Each look of disdain, each hurtful comment, each time she was made to feel invisible or labeled without potential, accumulated a heavy layer of pain in Isabella's soul, but also a fierce determination, a silent fire that propelled her forward. "I won't be their ghost. I'll be their worst nightmare," she promised herself, "and the whole world will see who the real artist was." It was a cold, autumn night, with rain lashing against the broken window of her small studio, when the seed of change was planted in Isabella's mind. She was sitting on the floor, going through her meager bills, feeling the weight of mounting debts, overdue rent, electricity about to be cut off, her parents' student loan, which she had inherited and which was strangling her. Suddenly, among the threatening letters from the bank, she found a receipt. It was a transfer receipt, stamped and marked, confirming that her rent had been paid in full, not by her, but by an anonymous donor. The receipt was accompanied by a small, handwritten note in elegant, unfamiliar calligraphy, on pristine white paper with a scent of sandalwood. "There is no darkness that a pure soul cannot illuminate. Keep creating. Your art is a truth that must be revealed." There was no signature, no name, only that enigmatic phrase and the inexplicable relief that for the first time in months, her roof was secure. Isabella stood motionless in the center of her studio, the receipt in her trembling hands. Disbelief struck her like lightning. Was this real? Was it a cruel joke, a trap, an illusion born of exhaustion? She opened and closed her eyes several times, pinching her arm to make sure she wasn't dreaming. The pain of the pinch was real, but the receipt and the note also seemed to be. Anonymous donor? Who and why? Her heart, previously heavy, began to beat with a pang of hope, a spark she had thought extinguished. Her debts, the slab that oppressed her, seemed to have been eased by an invisible hand. The phrase, "Your art is a truth that must be revealed," resonated in her mind, a melody that filled her with unexpected energy. Her mind, once again, began to work at dizzying speed, connecting dots, seeking patterns. Is there no darkness that a pure soul cannot illuminate? That phrase. It felt strangely familiar, like an echo of a forgotten melody. She spent the entire night with the receipt and note in hand, a whirlwind of thoughts in her head. What if this isn't a coincidence? What if there's someone out there, someone who believes in me, someone who's helping me without my knowing it? But who and why? A guardian angel? It's ridiculous, absurd. But what if it isn't? The mere thought sent a shiver down her spine. Disbelief mingled with a cold, steel-like determination. This was not just a gift. It was a sign, an Ariadne's thread guiding her out of the labyrinth of her misery, towards a truth she could not yet fully comprehend. The suspicion of a silent protector, a hidden ally, began to take shape in her mind, not as a fantasy, but as a real possibility. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, an unusual warmth that lifted her from the cold of the night and plunged her into a sea of questions and possibilities. The story of her art, the story of her life, she believed, still had hidden chapters. The process of her transformation and preparation was a long and arduous journey, a steep ascent from the depths of contempt to the pinnacles of mastery. There were no shortcuts, only sleepless nights and an iron determination, fueled by the mysterious help. Over the following months, every penny she earned at the coffee shop was invested in better quality materials, in books on art history, in online courses on new sculpture and painting techniques, and in developing her own artistic vision. Her small studio, though humble, became a crucible of experimentation. The air always thick with the scent of fresh oils, damp clay, and the faint aroma of the night coffee that kept her awake. She spent hours perfecting her material fusion technique, creating unprecedented textures on her canvases and sculpting abstract forms that contained a profound narrative. Every small advance in her art was a shot of pure adrenaline, a confirmation that she was on the right path. The investigation of her guardian angel was ongoing, a silent obsession that accompanied her everywhere. She delved into art forums, university libraries, which she could now access, free from the pressure of debts, searching for information about anonymous philanthropists, mysterious collectors, or any hint of an invisible hand. She discovered that small sums of money, intended to settle her most urgent debts, appeared sporadically in her account, always with the same cryptic description: payment for artistic services. The origin was impossible to trace. Her internal monologue was a constant stream of analysis. This isn't random. There's a pattern. Someone is observing my movements, someone who knows my situation, my needs. Who could be so generous, so silent? And above all, why? What would they gain from this? Is it an eccentric collector? Someone who knew my parents? The phrase, "There is no darkness that a pure soul cannot illuminate," keeps resonating with me. I can't get it out of my head. It has to mean something more, something personal. The idea that her art was more valuable than she believed, and that someone in the shadows recognized it, gave her superhuman strength. The obstacles were constant, one test after another for her unwavering spirit. Once, an accidental fire in a neighbor's studio spread to her wall, seriously damaging one of her most promising canvases, a painting that represented the struggle of her soul. Isabella felt such deep despair that she almost gave up. She sat on the floor of her studio, head in her hands, tasting the bitter flavor of frustration and helplessness. Tears, hot and furious, burned her eyes. What's the use, Isabella? What's the point of so much effort if fate insists on destroying everything? She told herself, her voice choked with sobs. But then, the memory of the anonymous note, the hope it had instilled in her, pushed her to get up. I won't give up. I won't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me fail. My art is stronger than any fire, she thought. She spent 3 entire days, without sleeping, restoring the work. And on the 4th day, the canvas, though scarred, was more powerful than before, a tangible representation of her own resilience. It was a small miracle forged with pure will and the certainty that she was not alone. Another setback was the scarcity of clients for her works. She continued selling her watercolors at the flea market, but her large canvases and sculptures did not attract the attention needed to get by. She needed a push, an exhibition. She had to use her savings, which the anonymous donor had discreetly helped grow, to rent a small space at an independent art fair, risking everything she had. The risk was immense, the fear of failure constant. But just as she was about to lose faith, a small local gallery, The Threshold, offered her a space in a collective exhibition, attracted by one of her works that an anonymous buyer had acquired at the fair and praised on social media. Frustration was constant, yes, but each time she overcame an obstacle, her confidence grew, her determination became more unshakable. Her training was not just artistic, it was mental, emotional. She learned to handle solitude, pressure, uncertainty. She became a strategist not only of art, but of her own survival. Her mind was her fortress, her sanctuary, the place where no Laurent or Dubois could ever enter or trample. The unexpected alliances were threads of light in the darkness of her journey. Connections forged not by interest, but by humanity and truth. The first to join her cause was an old art restorer, Mr. Elias Mendoza. Mr. Mendoza, a man in his 70s, with varnish-stained hands and messy white hair, ran a small restoration workshop in an old part of the city. His face was a network of wrinkles, but his eyes, deep and melancholic, seemed to have seen the history of art unfold before them. Isabella found him by chance, seeking advice on restoring an old sculpture by her father. When Mr. Mendoza saw the sculpture and the delicacy with which Isabella handled it, his eyes widened in surprise. "This piece, it has the hand of Ricardo Herrera. I knew him. A pure soul, a true artist, unfairly treated." Isabella, feeling an inexplicable connection with the old man, told him her story of the debts, the humiliations, the mysterious help. Mr. Mendoza listened with infinite patience, his wrinkled hands clutching a jeweler's loop. "Truth, my dear, is like the purest pigment. It always shines, no matter how much they cover it with falsehoods. And you, Miss Rossi, hold that truth in your hands, in your art." His motivation was clear: to honor the memory of his old friend Ricardo Herrera and correct an injustice that had gnawed at him for years. He was the one who guided her in investigating Laurent's forgeries, who taught her the secrets of authenticating works, who opened doors to hidden archives of honest collectors, and gave her valuable advice about the art market. Their conversations were extensive, not only about art and restoration techniques, but about life, about the pain of loss, about the resilience of the human spirit. Art, Isabella, is not just what you paint. It is the life you live, the truth you convey. And you are weaving a masterpiece with your own life, Mr. Mendoza told her, as he showed her how to analyze the composition of pigments. Their trust was forged in the silence of those nights in the workshop, in their mutual admiration for Ricardo Herrera, in their respect for truth. The second crucial ally was a young investigative journalist, Lara Beltran, in her mid-30s, with piercing eyes and a steely determination reflected in her short, practical hairstyle. Lara had been working on an investigation into corruption in the art world, following the tracks of Madame Dubois and Monsieur Laurent, but had run into a wall of silence and threats. She had felt the frustration of helplessness, of buried truth. Isabella contacted her by email, using an anonymous account suggested by Mr. Mendoza, and sent her a small sample of the evidence she had gathered on Laurent's forgeries and illicit dealings with Dubois. Lara, initially skeptical, felt a chill when she saw the level of detail and consistency of the information. They agreed to a secret meeting in a sparsely populated gallery. Lara appeared in a trench coat, her gaze scrutinizing the surroundings. Isabella, with her humble appearance, handed her a small USB stick. "Here's the rest. The story you haven't been able to tell. And the truth about my parents," she said. Lara reviewed the content on her laptop, her eyes moving rapidly over the documents, authentication reports, and suspicious sales records. The astonishment on her face was palpable. This is dynamite, Isabella. A scandal that will shake the art world. But how did you get it? And why come to me? Dubois and Laurent are dangerous." Isabella, her voice firm, explained her connection to Ricardo Herrera, the anonymous note, the mysterious help. "Because I know that you, Lara, were the only one who tried to go further, because I know that you have the courage to face them. And because this story is not just mine. It is the story of all the small artists who have been crushed by the great ones, of the truth that has been silenced by greed." Lara looked at Isabella, a light of admiration in her eyes. She saw not only an intelligent and determined young woman, but the living image of justice seeking its way. "We'll do it, Isabella," Lara said, a victorious smile appearing on her lips. "This time, no one will silence us. Not you, not your parents, not me. This will be the greatest masterpiece we've ever created." Their commitment was a pact sealed in the darkness of the gallery, an alliance of brilliant minds and indomitable spirits against the tyranny of corruption in art. The tension began to escalate, an invisible rope stretching to the breaking point, creaking with every movement. Madame Dubois and Monsieur Laurent, with their predatory instincts, began to feel increasing pressure, though they didn't know where it came from. Small negative reviews, signed by minor critics, appeared on art blogs, questioning the authenticity of some works sold by Laurent Artium or the credibility of Dubois' opinions. These were subtle attacks, almost imperceptible to the general public, but they irritated the two art moguls. Their pride prevented them from admitting that the problem was their lack of ethics. They began to pressure their media contacts, to launch smear campaigns against any dissenting voice, to look for scapegoats. Paranoia settled into their luxurious offices. One day, at the opening of an exhibition in a rival gallery, Isabella, discreetly dressed, mingled among the guests. She had managed to gain access thanks to an invitation Mr. Mendoza had secured for her. She observed Madame Dubois, who, with her sphinx-like smile, criticized a work by an emerging artist in her usual poisonous tone. Monsieur Laurent strolled through the room, flaunting an antique jewel, his gaze scrutinizing the attendees with a mixture of arrogance and distrust. Isabella casually encountered Madame Dubois near a canapé buffet. Dubois, seeing her, frowned, recognition crossing her face with a flash of disgust. "Miss Rossi, still among us. I thought you would have found a job more suited to your abilities," she said in a barely audible voice, but laden with contempt. "The art world is for the talented, not for, let's say, house painters." Isabella held her gaze, her eyes shining with a calm that unsettled Dubois. "Art is for those who have something to say, madame. Not for those who only have something to sell," Isabella replied with a clear, firm voice, a whisper that, nevertheless, resonated in Dubois' ears. The critic paled, her smile vanished, a pang of discomfort evident on her face. She quickly moved away, as if the air around Isabella had become toxic. Isabella's internal monologue. "She's cornered. I see it in her eyes. That facade of security is cracking. My words are just a whisper. But the truth of what I am creating, what I am revealing, will be a thunder that will shake their foundations. Arrogance is the thickest veil that prevents them from seeing their own vulnerability. She's feeling it, though she doesn't know why. Truth is a solvent for falsehood. The heat of contained rage, the silent satisfaction, coursed through her veins. She knew the pressure was working. Another confrontation occurred a week later. Monsieur Laurent organized a private auction of rare works in his gallery, an exclusive event accessible only by personal invitation. Lara Beltran, the journalist, managed to sneak in as an assistant to an anonymous collector, while Isabella observed from a nearby window, documenting every movement. Monsieur Laurent, with an air of superiority, presented a series of engravings attributed to an 18th century master. Lara, following Isabella's and Mr. Mendoza's instructions, asked a subtle but incisive question about the provenance of one of the pieces, a question formulated by Isabella. Laurent's face contorted. "My dear lady, your question is impertinent. The authenticity is more than guaranteed. To suggest otherwise would be an affront." His voice was tense, his smile forced. At that moment, Laurent's gaze met Isabella's through the window. He recognized her, the rustic artist who had defied him. His eyes widened with fury, a flash of panic. "Guards, get her out of here!" he shouted, pointing to the window, a gesture of uncontrollable desperation. Isabella just smiled, a defiant smile. Isabella's internal monologue. He's seen me, and he's reacted. That means we're close. This is dangerous, yes, but fear cannot paralyze me now. The plan is in motion. Every threat, every display of panic is a confirmation of their guilt, of their weakness. They worry about the minutiae of authenticity, but they don't see the falsehood that corrodes their own soul. Truth is a force they cannot stop. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, a fire that kept her awake and alert. She knew the final confrontation was imminent, that the curtain was about to fall on the farce of their lives. The explosive climax, the central revelation and vindication, the Laurent Artium Gallery, the most sacred temple of elitist art, was immersed in an atmosphere of anticipation and excessive opulence. The polished marble walls reflected the glow of spotlights, illuminating the most valuable works. The air smelled of incense and thousands of euros, and the murmur of inflated voices mingled with the clinking of champagne glasses. It was the night of the annual charity auction, the season's culminating event, where the social elite and the wealthiest collectors gathered to bid on exclusive works. Madame Dubois, in a haute couture dress that flowed like water, strolled through the crowd, her smile enigmatic, her critical words falling like judgments. Monsieur Laurent, impeccable in his tuxedo, with a wolf's smile and an all-encompassing gaze, was the host, the king of that ephemeral domain. The atmosphere was one of complacency, of unwavering security, as if nothing could disturb the perfection of their world. No one, absolutely no one, could foresee the cataclysm that was about to unfold. The auctioneer, an imposing man with a deep voice and exaggerated gestures, struck his hammer. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the star lot of the evening. A monumental sculpture by a hitherto unknown artist that promises to be the revelation of the season. Resonant Soul, by Isabella Rossi. We begin the bidding at 5 million euros. A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. Isabella Rossi's name, the no-potential artist, the cleaner, was already an anomaly in that place. Paddles quickly went up, raising the price in increments of hundreds of thousands. Madame Dubois and Monsieur Laurent looked at each other with a mix of curiosity and disdain, unaware that the work before them was a trap. Isabella, impeccably dressed in a simple but elegant black dress that highlighted the luminosity of her skin and the depth of her eyes, stood on a raised platform next to her sculpture. The work, an abstract piece of recycled metal and glass, about 3 meters high, stood majestically, glowing with an internal light that seemed to pulse. Her hands, once rough, now seemed an extension of the work, a part of it. Her face, once marked by tiredness, now reflected a serenity and determination that disarmed. The bidding climbed rapidly. 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. The auctioneer's voice was a constant drum. Monsieur Laurent, feeling challenged by the audacity of the piece and the unusual attention, raised his paddle with a grandiose gesture. 50 million euros. A stifled laugh rippled through the room. Victory seemed to be his. 50 million to Monsieur Laurent. Any higher bids? The silence became heavy, broken only by the expectant murmur. Just as the auctioneer was about to strike the final blow, Isabella, with a calm that unnerved Laurent, slowly, almost ceremoniously, raised her hand. 50 million, And 1 cent, she said with a clear, resonant voice that cut through the air like glass. A murmur of astonishment swept through the room, this time charged with confusion. The auctioneer, stunned, looked at her. Is the artist bidding on her own work? Monsieur Laurent's gaze met Isabella's, and for the first time, recognition struck him. His eyes widened with disbelief, then with a fear that made him pale. His face turned waxen white, the blood drained from his complexion, leaving him ashen as a corpse. Madame Dubois, beside him, felt a shiver run down her spine. Her hand flew to her open mouth, stifling a gasp, her eyes so wide that they seemed about to pop out of their sockets. The elegance of her posture crumbled, her figure slumped in an instant of pure terror and humiliation. The board members and collectors, at first, looked at Isabella with curiosity, then with frowns, until one of them, who had been following Lara Beltran's leaks, stammered with a broken voice. It's her. The one they said was going to unmask the corruption. This is ridiculous. She doesn't have that money. She's an imposter. She's a coffee shop cleaner. Monsieur Laurent yelled, his voice high and trembling, completely lacking the arrogance of minutes before. His face twisted into a grimace of desperation and impotent fury. Madame Dubois tried to intervene, stammering, "Silence, Jean-Luc. Don't talk nonsense." Isabella smiled with serene calm. "Allow me to correct you, Monsieur Laurent." Her voice was a silken whip, but without hatred, only the force of truth. "The coffee shop cleaner not only has that money, but I also have something else for you." With a gesture, the monumental sculpture Resonant Soul began to slowly rotate on its base. As it turned, the internal light of the piece shifted, and in the transparent glass fibers, embedded with millimeter precision, names, dates, figures, diagrams of bank transactions, and images of documents began to appear. This was the irrefutable proof. Forensic reports of Laurent's forgeries, records of illicit sales, recordings of Dubois' conversations manipulating the art market, the contracts that had stripped her parents of their works. Resonant Soul was not just a sculpture. It was a manifesto of truth, an archive of corruption carved in light and matter. Each revelation was a punch to the gut of Laurent's and Dubois' reputations. The shock was widespread. Murmurs transformed into a deafening silence. The faces of those present were a tableau of disbelief and horror. Monsieur Laurent put his hands to his head, his body trembling uncontrollably, words caught in his throat, his wide eyes fixed on Madame Dubois, who was pale as wax, sweating profusely, her elegance shattered by panic. Dubois tried to stand up, stammering, "This is a setup, a calumny. It's madness." But her words were lost in the roar of the truth that the sculpture projected. It was Lara Beltran, the journalist, sitting among the spectators, who broke the silence. "The truth at last," she shouted, and a small team of cameramen and reporters she had brought with her began to record every reaction, every gesture, capturing the magnate's downfall in real time. Then the auctioneer, recovered from his astonishment, struck the hammer with a thunderous force. 50,000,001 to Miss Isabella Rossi, sold, to the artist. A spontaneous and deafening applause erupted in the hall, a mixture of relief and admiration, of respect and awe. The power shift was instantaneous and visceral. Laurent and Dubois, previously untouchable, were now pathetic figures, their faces contorted by panic and humiliation. Furthermore, Isabella continued, her voice acquiring an authority she had never known she possessed. "The funds for this purchase, and for settling my debts and financing my work, do not come from nothing. They come from a trust established by an anonymous figure years ago, whose sole purpose was to ensure justice, truth, and the legacy of my parents. A small irony, don't you think? That the money to buy what you tried to destroy comes from those you tried to silence, and from a soul who trusted in art when no one else did. Just then, the gallery doors swung open, and judicial police officers entered, flanked by Mr. Elias Mendoza, who held his chin high, and a team of lawyers who had been working with Isabella and Lara. Monsieur Jean-Luc Laurent, Madame Odette Dubois, the chief of police announced, her voice grave. You are arrested on charges of art fraud, forgery, embezzlement of funds, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Handcuffs clinked, a brutal sound that sealed the fate of the art moguls. Laurent tried to resist, claiming innocence, but he was firmly subdued, his face contorted with rage and terror. Madame Dubois collapsed into her chair, sobbing, her impeccable image shattered. Isabella observed the scene with serene stillness. The vindication, which had taken almost a decade to arrive, was sweeter than she had imagined. There was no malicious joy on her face, only deep satisfaction, the peace of justice served, and the bitter certainty that true worth was never in gold, but in truth and in art. Monsieur Laurent and Madame Dubois' downfall was resounding, a collapse that echoed in every headline of specialized press, in every cultural news report, in every conversation of high society and the art world. The news spread like wildfire, sweeping away decades of reputation and prestige built on lies. The temple of corrupt art collapses, fraud, forgeries, and the triumph of Isabella Rossi. Newspapers screamed. The most feared art critic exposed. The end of an era of hypocrisy. The world that had revered them, that had envied their influence and fortune, now repudiated them vehemently, with an almost palpable disgust that spread like a plague through every gallery and museum. The legal ramifications were immense, complex, extending across multiple jurisdictions. Their bank accounts in tax havens were frozen, their properties seized, their vast art collections, some of them fake, liquidated to pay massive fines and compensation to defrauded artists and deceived collectors. The trials were long and highly publicized, revealing layer after layer the immense web of corruption they had woven for decades. The lives of artists they had destroyed in their wake. The businesses they had ruined for their own illicit gain. Monsieur Jean-Luc Laurent, the once untouchable gallery owner, was sentenced to a long prison term, his fate sealed in a cold, solitary cell. A brutally distant reality from the life of obscene luxuries and absolute power to which he was accustomed. Mr. Elias Mendoza, the restorer, had made sure that the details of his prison life were public knowledge. The degradation of a man who believed himself above all, now reduced to a number, his dignity crushed. Madame Odette Dubois, with a somewhat shorter sentence but an astronomical fine, was released on bail. But her social and professional ruin was complete. No one in the art world wanted to associate with her. Her old friends turned their backs on her, her phone stopped ringing, her articles were systematically rejected. She was an outcast, consumed by shame and remorse, forced to sell her properties and jewels to survive and pay her legal debts. The Laurent Artium Gallery was closed and its assets auctioned off, a tangible reminder of their fall and the irony of fate. Isabella Rossi's triumph, on the other hand, was resplendent, an epic rebirth that moved the nation and, more subtly, the entire world. Overnight, the artist with no potential became a living symbol of resilience, of implacable justice, and of the truth which, when nurtured by authenticity and perseverance, always finds its way to light. Isabella did not keep Laurent's gallery. Instead, With the unexpected fortune from the trust, she founded a new gallery, Hidden Soul, a space dedicated to emerging artists, to underestimated talents, and to works that prioritized emotion and truth over commercialization. Her first action was to restore and exhibit, for the first time in decades, the original works of her parents, Ricardo and Sofia Herrera, giving them the credit they were always denied, and using the Herrera building as the main headquarters of the foundation she created. The impact on her chosen family was immediate and deeply healing. Mr. Elias Mendoza, the old restorer, was appointed honorary director of the board of the new gallery and foundation. A state-of-the-art restoration workshop was built for him, where he spent his final years surrounded by the beauty he loved so much, a space worthy of his wisdom. Lara Beltran, the journalist, was appointed communications director of the foundation, her talent and ethics recognized and rewarded, working side by side with Isabella on every new social impact project. She became her confidant, her soul sister, the person who understood her vision beyond words. Isabella's emotional healing was gradual. Rage transformed into a profound calm, desperation into serene determination. Her immense wealth did not corrupt her. On the contrary, she used it as a tool for good. Philanthropy became her new passion, the purest expression of her triumph and her desire for social justice. She used her fortune to create not only the gallery and the foundation, but also scholarship programs for young, low-income artists, free art workshops in marginalized neighborhoods, and art-based rehabilitation programs for the homeless. She wanted no one else to experience the kind of invisibility, humiliation, or hopelessness she herself had suffered, nor for talent to be lost due to lack of opportunity. Her new studio, adjacent to the gallery, was a bright and spacious place, with panoramic views of the city that had once turned its back on her. A city that now, under her influence, began to breathe in a new way, inspired by art and truth. On her work table, there were no luxury figures, but sketches of new projects, prototypes of innovative sculptures, and photographs of the children from the neighborhoods who now found in art a way of escape and hope. Her inner peace was palpable, a deep calm achieved only after overcoming the most extreme adversity and finding true purpose beyond personal revenge. There were significant reunions, moments charged with symbolism and emotional nuances. One day, Isabella met the owner of the coffee shop where she used to clean bathrooms at an exhibition in her new gallery. The man, now visibly deteriorated, with his coffee shop on the verge of bankruptcy due to mismanagement, recognized her instantly. Seeing the transformed Isabella, a woman of power and elegance, his eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and a shame so profound that it tinged his cheeks a deep, almost painful red. His posture slumped slightly, as if the weight of regret overwhelmed him. He tried to avoid her gaze, to hide in the crowd, but Isabella approached with a kind smile and a look that contained no reproach, only deep understanding. "Good evening, sir," she said with a soft, serene voice, bearing no trace of past bitterness. He could only nod his head, unable to utter a word, his lips trembling in a grimace of deep discomfort. Isabella did not humiliate him. Her mere presence, her transformation, her ascent to the top, was the greatest punishment. A silent lesson that compassion is more powerful than judgment, and that external appearance is a veil that deceives the blind-hearted. Another day, during a charity event organized by her foundation in the former Laurent Artium Gallery building, now a community art center, she crossed paths with Clara, the old academy classmate who had scorned her. Clara, whose own career had stagnated, looked at her with a mix of admiration and obvious regret in her eyes. "Isabella, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was so blind, Clara whispered, her words laden with sincerity. Isabella looked at her kindly. Art has many ways of revealing itself, Clara. Sometimes the greatest of them is life itself. No more words were needed. Isabella offered her a position as assistant curator at the gallery, an opportunity for her to redeem herself and for her talent, finally, to flourish. Isabella Rossi lived many more years, becoming a beacon of hope and a living testament that human dignity is inalienable, and that perseverance, when accompanied by a noble purpose, is the fuel for the most astonishing miracles. Her story became a legend, told in universities, museums, and international forums. An echo reminding that a person's true worth does not reside in the brilliance of their possessions, nor in the thickness of their bank account, nor in the judgment of critics, but in the unshakable strength of their spirit and the purity of their heart, in the ability to rise from the ashes and build a better world. The enduring message she bequeathed to the world was clear. My dear friend, never underestimate anyone. Never judge a book by its cover, because true nobility is not measured by inherited wealth or power gained through deceit, but by the ability to rise from the deepest fall, to forgive, to fight for justice, and to use one's own experience, however painful, to illuminate the path of others. Her life was a testament that, even in the deepest darkness, the light of truth, compassion, and underestimated genius will always, always find a way to shine. And so, the woman who was invisible became a light that guided generations, demonstrating that true fortune is not in gold, but in art, in building dreams on solid foundations of ethics, and in the unwavering pursuit of justice, a legacy of a guardian angel whose name, though never spoken, would resonate in every stroke of color and in every form sculpted by Isabella Rossi. Her memory and that of her story would endure for centuries, a whisper of hope in every forgotten corner of the world, reminding us that a person's real value is not in the size of their bank account or the luster of their surname, but in the indomitable resilience of their spirit and the deep humanity nestled in their heart. True greatness, in the end, always reveals itself. No matter how many layers of dust and oblivion try to hide it from the eyes of those who only see the superficial.